August 3rd, 1960. Dean Martin was outnumbered 10-1. Lucky Luciano had sent his most reliable crew: Tony the Ant, Spilotro, Jimmy the Weasel Fratianno, Salvatore, Sammy G, Giancana's personal enforcer, Chuckie Nicoletti, 7 more soldiers whose names the FBI kept in sealed files. They cornered Dean at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. Private suite. No press, no witnesses, no cameras. Dean was 43 years old, at the absolute peak of his career. The biggest star in Vegas, maybe in America. Luciano was a godfather of organized crime, the man who created the commission, who'd restructured the entire American Mafia. Everyone expected the same ending they'd seen 100 times before. The entertainer bows, pays up, does what he's told. But what Luciano didn't know about Dean Martin, what almost nobody knew, was that Dean Martin didn't bow to anyone. Not to the studio heads who'd made him, not to his ex-partners who'd tried to control him, and certainly not to mobsters, no matter how powerful. For hours later, only one of those 10 men walked out of that suite under his own power. And he delivered a message that made Lucky Luciano, the man who'd personally ordered over 60 hits, do something he hadn't done in 25 years. He laughed. Then he made a phone call that changed everything. This is the story of the night Dean Martin proved he was untouchable. The empire from exile. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand Lucky Luciano's position in 1960. He wasn't in America anymore. He'd been deported to Italy in 1946. Part of a deal after he'd helped the U.S. government during World War II. But deportation didn't mean retirement. Not for Luciano. From a villa in Naples, Lucky still ran operations that stretched across 3 continents. The heroin trade, the casinos, labor unions, entertainment. He'd transformed organized crime from street gangs into a business empire, and that empire needed management. Las Vegas was a crown jewel. After Bugsy Siegel got himself killed over the Flamingo, Luciano had learned an important lesson. Don't let one man control the vision. Spread the risk. Spread the profits. By 1960, mob money was flowing into Vegas like a river. The Sands, the Tropicana, the Stardust, the Desert Inn, and entertainment was the key to all of it. You needed stars, big names, people who could pack the showroom, keep the whales gambling, make the tourists feel like they were seeing something special. Frank Sinatra understood this. He bought into the Cal Neva, had points in the Sands. Frank played ball. Dean Martin? Dean was different. Dean had something Frank didn't have. Leverage. See, by 1960, Dean Martin was bigger than Frank. His records outsold Frank's. His movies made more money. His TV specials got better ratings. When Dean walked into a casino, the place filled up. People came to Vegas specifically to see Dean Martin. And Dean knew it. He'd renegotiated his Sands contract in '59. Not just for more money, though he got that $100,000 a week, unheard of at the time, but for something more important. Control. Dean could choose his set times, could decide how many shows he'd do, could walk off stage if he felt like it. More than that, Dean had started making his own deals. He'd talked to other casino owners. The Riviera wanted him. The Flamingo was offering him points. Dean was playing them against each other, driving his price up, making his own rules. And in Las Vegas in 1960, making your own rules meant you weren't following theirs. The commission noticed. Meyer Lansky called Luciano in Naples. "We've got a situation," Meyer said. "The singer thinks he's running his own show." Luciano listened. He understood entertainment. He'd been involved with clubs and theaters since the 20s. He knew stars had egos, but he also knew something else. In their world, there were rules. And when someone broke the rules, you reminded them, publicly if necessary. What did he do? Luciano asked. He's been taking meetings with Chicago. Independent meetings. No one from our people present. He's talking about a residency at a new place they're building. Talking about bringing in his own guys to run security. His own people to handle the money. Luciano went quiet. That was different. That wasn't just ego. That was Dean Martin trying to cut them out entirely, trying to operate in their city, in their casinos, without going through them. Send someone to talk to him. Luciano said, "We did." He laughed at them, literally laughed, said, and I quote, "I don't take orders from accountants." Luciano rubbed his temples. He was 63 years old. He'd survived everything: rivals, prosecutors, prison, deportation. He'd done it by being smart, by being ruthless when necessary, and by making examples when needed. "Then we'll send people who aren't accountants," Luciano said. Dean Martin, the exception. Dean Martin was born Dino Paul Crocetti in Steubenville, Ohio, in 1917, son of Italian immigrants. His father was a barber. His mother barely spoke English. Dean dropped out of school in 10th grade, worked as a bootlegger, a car dealer, a boxer. He knew the life. He'd grown up around it. By the time he made it to Hollywood, Dean understood how power worked. He'd watch his comedy partner, Jerry Lewis, get all the attention while Dean did all the work. He let that happen for years. Let Jerry be the star. Let Jerry take the bows. Because Dean was learning, watching, waiting. When they finally split in 1956, everyone predicted Dean would disappear. Jerry was a talent, they said. Jerry was a draw. Dean was just a straight man, the pretty face. They were wrong. Within 2 years, Dean had his own hit TV show, his own movie deal, his own recording contract. He'd become bigger than he'd ever been with Jerry. And he'd done it by being smart, by being professional, by showing up, doing the work, and never, ever letting anyone see him sweat. Dean Martin cultivated an image. The drunk, the playboy, the guy who didn't care. But it was an act. Dean barely drank on stage. That tumble was apple juice. The stumbling, choreographed. The casual attitude, strategy. Because here's what people didn't understand about Dean Martin. He wasn't some dumb crooner who got lucky. He was a businessman. He read his contracts. He knew his worth. And he'd learned from watching Sinatra's mistakes. Frank needed the mob, needed their clubs, their casinos, their connections. Frank had gotten into debt early, had needed them to bail him out, to get him to roll in from here to eternity. Frank owed them. Dean didn't. Dean had come up differently. He'd saved his money, made smart investments. By 1960, Dean Martin didn't need Vegas. Vegas needed Dean Martin. And he knew it. The Rat Pack? That was fun for Dean. But it was also leverage. Because when Frank, Sammy, Peter, and Joey were all on stage together, who got the biggest applause? Dean, who sold the most records. Dean, who could walk away anytime he wanted. Dean. And in early 1960, Dean started considering doing exactly that. Chicago Outfit was building a new casino hotel, the Nugget. They wanted Dean to headline. Exclusive. No Sands. No sharing time with Frank. No playing second fiddle. Just Dean Martin every night. At a casino where he'd have points, real ownership. Dean's manager, Herman Citron, set up meetings. They were quiet about it, but not quiet enough. Word got back to the commission and to Lucky Luciano. What Dean didn't know, or maybe he didn't know and didn't care, was that the Chicago deal wasn't independent. It was a power play by Sam Giancana, trying to expand his territory at the expense of the other families, using Dean as the wedge. For Luciano, this wasn't just about money. It was about respect. It was about maintaining the structure he'd built. If Dean Martin could pick and choose, could make side deals, could ignore the commission, then what? Every other performer would try the same thing. The system would collapse. Meyer Lansky told Luciano, "We need to make it clear. You work in Vegas. You go through us." Luciano agreed, but there was a problem. Dean Martin wasn't some nobody you could threaten. He was beloved, America's favorite. You couldn't just make him disappear. The FBI would actually investigate. The press would go crazy. So Luciano decided on a different approach. Not a threat, a conversation, a reminder. Send enough people that Dean would understand this was serious. But keep it professional. No weapons, no violence. Just a clear message. This is how things work. Here's what we need from you. Here's what happens if you don't cooperate. 10 men. That was the number Luciano settled on. Enough to make an impression. Not so many it looked like an army. The 10. Tony Spilotro was the first call. Tony was Chicago's liaison to Vegas. Barely 22 years old, but already with a reputation. Smart, vicious when needed, but capable of diplomacy. Tony's job was to be the face, to do the talking. Jimmy Fratianno, the Weasel, came from Los Angeles. Jimmy was older, experienced, a made man who'd seen it all. He was there to add weight, to make sure Tony didn't let his youth get the better of him. Chuckie Nicoletti was Sam Giancana's personal enforcer. His presence sent a specific message. Even though this was about Chicago's deal, Giancana himself was on board with keeping Dean in line. Chicago wasn't backing their own play anymore. The other 7 were soldiers, good earners, reliable, men who knew how to handle themselves but also knew how to handle delicate situations. This wasn't a hit squad. This was a delegation. They flew into Vegas separately, checked into different hotels, stayed off of casino floors. This had to be discreet. No one could know the mob was leaning on Dean Martin. Bad for business. Bad for Dean's image, which they still needed to sell tickets. August 3rd, 1960. They coordinated through payphones. Met in a suite at the Desert Inn at 7 p.m. to go over the approach. Tony would take the lead. Keep it respectful. Explain the situation. Dean was breaking protocol. The Chicago deal couldn't happen. Not without commission approval. But if Dean wanted more money from the Sands, they could work that out. If he wanted better terms, they'd negotiate. They weren't unreasonable. They rehearsed it. Jimmy played Dean, threw up objections. Tony practiced his responses. By 9 p.m., they felt ready. Dean was performing at the Sands at night, 2 shows, 8 and midnight. The plan was to catch him between shows in his private suite on the top floor. Dean's usual security was minimal. 1 guy, usually, sometimes 2, ex-cops who were there more for the image than anything else. They'd asked the Sands manager to make sure Dean's security took a break. Tell them Dean wants privacy. Just for an hour. The manager complied. He worked for the same people Tony and Jimmy did. At 10:15 p.m., the 10 men took the service elevator up to the penthouse floor. 2 stayed by the elevator. 2 covered the stairwell. The other 6, led by Tony and Jimmy, walked to Dean's suite and knocked. The encounter. Dean Martin opened the door himself. He was still in his tuxedo from the first show, bow tie undone, collar open, a rocks glass in his hand. He looked at the 6 men in the hallway and smiled that famous smile, the one that made audiences swoon. "Gentlemen," he said, "this must be my 10:15. Tony Spilotro blinked. "You were expecting us?" "Well, not you specifically," Dean said, stepping aside to let them in. "But someone figured it was coming. You boys want a drink." The suite was massive. Living room, dining room, full bar, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Strip. Dean walked to the bar, poured himself a refill. Apple juice. Not that Tony and the others knew that. Mr. Martin. Tony started, trying to regain control of the situation. "We need to discuss." "Chicago," Dean interrupted. "The Nugget deal. Whether I should have taken meetings without running it by the right people first." He turned, leaned against the bar. "That about cover it?" Jimmy Fratianno stepped forward. "You understand why we're here then?" "Sure," Dean said. "You're here to explain how things work. How Vegas works. How there are rules and I broke them." He sipped his drink. "Did I miss anything?" The other 4 men spread out in the room, blocking the exits. Standard procedure. Dean noticed but didn't react. Tony tried again. "Mr. Martin, with all due respect, you're making this harder than it needs to be. We're here to have a conversation. Man to man. We're not here to..." "To what?" Dean asked. "Threaten me? Rough me up? Because let's be clear about something, gentlemen. I grew up in Steubenville. I ran liquor for the Mayfield Road Gang when I was 15 years old. I've been in the back rooms. I've taken my share of beatings. So if that's what this is, let's skip the foreplay and get to it." The room went quiet. This wasn't how these conversations usually went. Usually there was fear, negotiation, pleading. Dean Martin was doing none of that. Chuckie Nicoletti spoke up. No one's here to hurt you, Mr. Martin. We're here because Mr. Giancana, Mr. Lansky, and certain other interested parties want to make sure there's no misunderstanding. The Chicago deal is dead, Dean said. I know. I figured that out when Sam stopped returning my calls last week. Then what's the problem? Jimmy asked. The problem, Dean said, setting his glass down, is that you boys think I work for you, that I need your permission, that I should be grateful for the opportunity to perform in your casinos, and take your money and follow your rules. He walked toward the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out at Las Vegas lit up below. Let me tell you what I think. I think you need me a hell of a lot more than I need you. I think I could walk away from Vegas tomorrow, and I'd be just fine. Movies, TV, records. I've got options. But you? Without stars like me and Frank, these casinos are just buildings with card tables. Tony's jaw tightened. Mr. Martin, you're misunderstanding the situation. Dean turned back to face them. No, kid, you're misunderstanding. See, you came here with 9 of your friends thinking the numbers would impress me, thinking I'd see how serious you were and fall in line. But here's what you don't get. He pointed at each of them. I don't care how many of you there are. I don't care who sent you. And I'm sure as hell not scared. Maybe you should be, one of the soldiers said. Dean walked right up to him, stood 6 inches away, then do something about it. The room crackled with tension. The soldier's hand drifted toward his jacket. Tony grabbed his arm. We're not doing that. Why not? Dean asked. Because Lucky would be mad? Because it's bad for business? Or because you're starting to realize I'm right? He went back to the bar, poured another drink. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You're going to tell whoever sent you that Dean Martin says thanks for the visit, but he'll make his own decisions about his career. If the Sands wants to keep me, they'll meet my terms. If not, I'll work somewhere else. Maybe Chicago. Maybe the Riviera. Maybe I'll build my own goddamn casino. You can't do that, Jimmy said. Watch me. Jimmy looked at Tony. Tony looked at Chuckie. They hadn't planned for this. In their world, when 10 men showed up at your door, you listened. You cooperated. You didn't lecture them about leverage and options. Mr. Martin, Tony said carefully, I don't think you understand what you're saying no to. I understand perfectly. Dean walked over to the door, opened it. Now get out of my suite. I've got another show in an hour, and I need to warm up my voice. Nobody moved. This wasn't over. It couldn't be over. They'd come here with a job to do. Gentlemen, Dean said, voice hardening. I'm asking nicely. Once. One of the soldiers near the window laughed. Or what? You'll call security? Security works for us. No, Dean said. I'll call him. He picked up the phone, dialed. Everyone in the room tensed. Who was he calling? The police? Another casino? Yeah, it's Dean, he said into the phone. I've got some visitors who are overstaying their welcome. Can you come up? He listened. 10 of them. Yeah, thanks. He hung up, smiled at the confused faces. Should be here in about 3 minutes. Who did you call? Tony demanded. A friend. They waited. Tony was calculating. This could still be salvaged. Whoever Dean called, they'd deal with. Then they'd get back to the conversation. Make Dean understand. 2 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Dean opened it. Frank Sinatra walked in. Frank Sinatra, who had his own connections, his own relationships with the families. Frank Sinatra, who'd been Dean's friend for years, but who also knew which side his bread was buttered on. The men in the room relaxed slightly. Frank would straighten this out. Frankie, Dean said, thanks for coming. Frank looked around the room, looked at Tony, Jimmy, Chuckie, recognized them, understood immediately what was happening. Then he looked at Dean. What do you need, Dino? These gentlemen were just leaving. I wanted someone to make sure they found the elevator okay. Frank stood there for a long moment. Tony started to speak, to explain, to bring Frank into it. But Frank held up his hand. Dean's at a show in an hour. Frank said quietly, maybe we should let him prepare. Mr. Sinatra. Jimmy said, "We're here on business that—" "I know what business you're here on," Frank said. "And I'm telling you, Dean's got a show. Whatever you need to discuss, it can wait." It wasn't suggestion. Frank Sinatra might have owed the mob, but in Vegas, in the Sands, he was still Frank Sinatra, and he was choosing Dean's side. The calculation changed. Tony and Jimmy exchanged glances. This wasn't worth it. Not here, not now, not with Frank involved. "We'll continue this conversation later," Tony said. "No," Dean replied. "We won't. We're done. You came. You said your piece. I said mine. That's it. It's not that simple. It is that simple." Dean's voice was steel now. "Tell Lucky that Dean Martin doesn't take orders. Tell him I respect what he's built, but I'm not part of it. Tell him if he's got a problem with that. He knows where to find me. But tell him this too. If anyone tries anything at all, I'll go to every newspaper and TV station in the country and tell him exactly how Vegas really works. I'll burn the whole thing down." Jimmy laughed, but was hollow. "You destroy your own career." "Maybe," Dean said, "but I destroy yours too. That a risk you want to take?" The 10 men left. They didn't say goodbye, didn't shake hands, just walked out down the hall to the elevator. The 2 men stationed there joined them, confused about why they were leaving. In the suite, Frank turned to Dean. "You know what you just did?" "Yeah. They're not going to forget this." "Good," Dean said. "I don't want them to." Frank shook his head, but he was smiling. "You're crazy." "Maybe, but I'm also right." The return. 3 of the 10 men needed medical attention. Not from violence, from stress. One had a panic attack in the elevator. One threw up in the parking lot. One broke out in hives. The rest gathered back at the Desert Inn, trying to process what had happened. They'd been sent to intimidate Dean Martin. Instead, he'd intimidated them, not with threats, with confidence, with the absolute certainty that he didn't need them. Tony Spilotro was furious. We should have grabbed him, should have made him understand. Jimmy Fratianno shook his head. "And had Frank Sinatra as a witness? Are you insane?" "So, what do we tell them?" Chuckie asked. "That we failed? That a singer told us to go to hell, and we just left?" "We tell them the truth," Jimmy said. "We tell them Dean Martin isn't some club singer you can push around. We tell them he's got resources, connections, and most importantly, he's got the nuclear option. He'll expose the whole operation if we push him. They won't accept that. Then let them come try themselves." But they didn't. 8 of the 10 men flew back to their respective cities that night. Tony and Jimmy stayed in Vegas one more day, trying to figure out their next move. In the end, they decided Jimmy would fly to Naples and deliver the message in person. It had to come from someone Luciano trusted. Tony Spilotro, the young enforcer who'd one day terrorized Vegas in the 70s and 80s, went back to Chicago and told Sam Giancana, "Dean Martin is different. He's not like the others." Giancana, who'd dealt with hundreds of uncooperative people in his career, asked one question. "Is he bluffing about going public?" "No," Tony said. "He'll do it, and he'll take all of us down with him." The message. Jimmy Fratianno flew to Naples on August 8th, 1960. He met Lucky Luciano at a cafe overlooking the Mediterranean. Luciano was tan, relaxed, living well in exile. He listened to Jimmy's report without interrupting. When Jimmy finished, Luciano stirred his espresso and smiled. Not an angry smile, an amused smile. He really said that? That he'd burn it all down. Word for word, boss. Luciano laughed. Actually laughed. "You know what? I believe him." Jimmy was confused. "So what do we do?" "Nothing. Nothing. Nothing," Luciano repeated. "We leave Dean Martin alone. We let him do his thing." "But boss, if we let him get away with this." "He's not getting away with anything," Luciano said. "He's making a smart business decision. Think about it. He knows his value. He knows we need him more than he needs us. He called our bluff. And you know what? He was right to do it. He leaned back, lit a cigarette. You know what separates someone like Dean Martin from all the other singers and actors we deal with? He's got balls. Real balls. Not the fake kind. The kind where you talk tough and fold when it matters. Dean Martin would actually do it. He'd destroy his career to make a point. So we just let him walk? We let him walk, Luciano confirmed. Because here's the thing, Jimmy. We don't need to control Dean Martin. We need him to keep performing, to keep bringing people to Vegas, to keep making money that flows through our casinos. And he'll do that whether he's taking orders from us or not. But the precedent? There is no precedent. Luciano cut him off. Dean Martin is one of one. There's nobody else like him. Nobody else with his talent, his draw, his willingness to risk everything. You can't treat him like you treat everyone else because he's not everyone else. He stubbed out his cigarette, passed the word. Dean Martin is hands off. Anyone who has a problem with that can come talk to me personally. Jimmy flew back to the States and delivered the message. The commission discussed it briefly. Meyer Lansky understood immediately. He's right, Meyer said. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. Sam Giancana was less pleased, but he accepted it. The Chicago deal was dead anyway. Dean wasn't going to headline their casino, but he also wasn't going to cause problems for their existing operations. And Dean Martin? He re-signed with the Sands. Better terms, more money, more control, and a clause in his contract that said he could walk anytime, no penalties, no obligations. He performed in Vegas for another 30 years, made millions, became a legend, and he never, ever took orders from anyone. Legacy, August 3rd, 1960. 10 men went to intimidate Dean Martin. One went to Italy to deliver the message that it couldn't be done. And the entire power structure of Las Vegas learned an important lesson. Some people can't be controlled, not because they're tougher, not because they're more violent, but because they understand their own worth and they're willing to walk away. Dean Martin wasn't a mobster, wasn't a tough guy, but he had something more dangerous than muscle. He had options, and he had the guts to use them. Lucky Luciano respected that, in his own way. By leaving Dean alone, he was acknowledging that some battles aren't worth fighting, that sometimes the smartest move is knowing when you've met your match. Dean kept that story quiet for years, didn't brag about it, didn't use it for publicity. It only came out decades later, after everyone involved was dead or retired. A testament to Dean's professionalism. He'd made his point. He didn't need to prove it again. Frank Sinatra once said about Dean, he's the only man in the world who could walk into a room full of gangsters and walk out without a scratch. Not because he's connected, because he doesn't give a damn. That night at the Sands, Dean proved Frank right. He faced down 10 men sent by the most powerful crime boss in history. And he won, not with violence, not with threats, with pure, unshakable confidence. If this story left you speechless, hit that subscribe button. We're uncovering the Vegas stories that never made it to the history books. The showdowns, the power plays, the moments that define an era. Drop a like if you think Dean Martin had more guts than anyone give him credit for. And in the comments, tell us, could anyone today pull off what Dean did in 1960? More legendary Vegas tales coming soon. You won't want to miss them.